Tinfoil hat. Oh, what the fuck are you guys even talking about?
Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them.
Welcome to Tinfoil Hat. We go deep, homeboy. Aaron, open your mind. Drink from the fountain of knowledge. There's lizard people everywhere. That's some interdimensional shit. Wake up, Aaron.
This is only the beginning.
Dude, you just blew my mind.
Are you ready to get your mind blown?
Good morning, Swarm, and welcome to Tinfoil Hat. You know I am. You know I'm here too.
Rock.
Join me as always, Xavier Guerrero, and on the ones and two, Jay Nice, Juicy Johnny, Johnny Woodard, live from the Wise Wolf Gold and Silver Studios. That's right. Just go to SamTripoli.gold, use the promo code TINFOIL, and get in on the action. Buy precious metals sent right to your house for as little as $50 a month. It's just that simple. Guys, we got a great show for you today. We have author Rachel Wilson here to talk about her book, Occult Feminism. It is one of the best episodes we've ever done. Before we get into it, go to SamTripoli.com. Grab tickets to my shows this weekend. We're in Morris Plains. Eddie Bravo, Xavier Guerrero, myself. We're live at the Dojo of Comedy on the 20th, Thursday night. We're doing a stand-up comedy night. And then the next night, we're doing a stand-up comedy, the Tinfoil Hat Comedy Night, and then Swarm Tank. Okay? Then the following night, we're in one of our favorite venues out there, the beautiful Broadbrook Opera House for Tinfoil Hat and Comedy with Swarm Tank. And then finally, Kansas City, where I'm at the Comedy Club. Come get weird. Let's get in this episode with the lovely, talented, and she just drops the hammer of the gods, Rachel Wilson. Enjoy the episode.
Drink from the fountain.
All right, let's get into it. So excited to have this guest on and to talk about this topic. I think it's like one of those that are just like, oh, dude, this is my jam. I love discussing this. That, you know, as we peel back the rotten onion, there's layers upon layers upon layers, and you never get to the middle, but you just start to understand there's more to everything than what appears. So I'm very excited to have on. She is an author, she is a researcher, and she has an amazing book called Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation. Please welcome Rachel Wilson. How are you, Rachel?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to be here. I've been very excited to come on and chat with you guys about this. So thanks for having me.
We appreciate it. You have great energy. Thank you so much. Thank you for slumming with us. We don't always get the real researchers out there, so we're very excited to have you on. Rachel, for those who are not familiar with your it's so funny, who are not familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where our listeners can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I'm an author and researcher. My specialty is the history of women's liberation, and you can find me on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. I'm on Twitter at Rach4Patriarchy. And you can also find me on Substack at rwilson.substack.com. And the book you can find on Amazon.
Rachel, were you recently on the Whatever podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was.
Yeah. How did you get on that show?
Well, my husband, Andrew, is like the most popular returning guest they've ever had. He's on there all the time. And we have kind of, obviously we're married. We have very similar worldview and similar things that we do. Although, you know, he's more of a political blood sports debater, commentator. But everybody's been begging to get this guy's wife on there because they always think he's this evil misogynist and that I must be chained to a stove, you know, forced to just cook him meals all day and never allowed to leave the house. So I was happy to go on and tangle with some of the other guests on there.
It is very interesting to me, you know, because when you talk about, you know, I've had situations where I've been in relationships and we've had discussions about roles. And, you know, I as a man I'm seen as the provider, right? And which is a very 1950s view, right? And then you go, well, I would like to come home to a meal and a clean house. And the other side loses it Like, how can you sit there and be like, think I'm the 1950s housewife? But I'm like, you want me to be a 1950s father or husband or boyfriend or whatever that role between me and this person was. Like, well, you want me to be that, you want me to fulfill that side, but you don't want to fulfill the yin and the yang of those sides. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that, I could go on forever, but my Twitter, one of the reasons I think I do well on Twitter is because that's the kind of stuff I talk about all the time, that modern women are extremely delusional. And the reason I think for that is that we live in this technologically advanced society where this huge modern infrastructure was invented, built, and is maintained by men for women to a large degree. And you know, I'm a little older, so I grew up before, I don't think I had internet until I was like 21. I'm 43 years old. So I kind of grew up with an analog childhood, and I think that gives me a little advantage over like the younger girls that are out there. But these Gen Z girls, let me tell you, they think they just wake up in the morning and their little cell phone tells them everything they want to know. They just turn on a switch and the lights come on. They just turn the key in their car and their car drives on these roads that are just there. And so they honestly think they don't need men. They think that men are like obsolete and that the world that allows them to think they're equal with men is just going to always be there. They just take it for granted and they have no idea. I mean, most Americans are very historically illiterate anyway, but I think young women especially just have no idea about the world that they live in and that it was created and is maintained and built by men. So they run around with this idea that they are strong and independent. They can do everything themselves. They grow up watching all the Marvel movies with 90-pound women who can kick 5 dudes' asses, you know, while enjoying a hot bowl of soup. And that's reality to them. So a lot of what I do some debates and things on my husband's channel. And a lot of what I do is just completely break down that idiotic, ridiculous illusion that they have and kind of try to drag them back to reality, very much for their own good. Not because I hate women, not because I want to be mean to them, but because they need a reality check and they need to be brought back to the real world.
I think you're so important. I think that role that you are doing is so important because young women get lied to by old feminists all the time. To toe this line, and what they don't understand, it's like I've always said this. Like I always felt like Yelp, there should be a Yelp for Yelpers, right? Like you should have a Yelp which tells you like what the Yelper's going through in his life, like, you know, like how many times divorced are they? Like, are they a felon? Like, I want to know like where you're coming from so I can understand your opinion. And it really is important. Like so much of what is presented to the younger generation is kind of this kind of facade that like I'm wise and I'm old, but are you happy? Are you really happy? And the answer is no. I don't know what the answer is for women. I don't know like what is the best role, but I know the freedom that women have gotten now is not leading them to overall happiness. And they're all kidding. Right. Yeah. They're all on medication. They're taking medications. They'll take a medication for one thing, and then they got to take a medication to deal with the side effects of that medication. And they're taking and it's just like they're on all these medications, and none of their balance is fine. And they're not happy at the end of the day. And I say this to everybody. This is not like a only woman's thing. Like, you know, there's a lot of times that women like feel like in society, oh, you know, you get to a certain age, you become invisible. What I always tell them is, no, you just become like everybody else. Meaning like you now have to earn everything that you want. It's no longer everybody wants to get down your pants. You get everything for free now. Those days are done. And it doesn't mean you don't have value. It doesn't mean you're not loved. It doesn't mean that you're not beautiful. But what really starts to happen is that your generation, people of your age, their worlds become very small. They start working. They had kids. They're worried about their family, their kids' education, their kids' future, all that stuff. They're not calling, hey, you want to go to TJ Fridays? No, those days are done. And now you don't have any of that, and you're like, why is the phone ringing? Because your age, it's the arc of life. You just right?
Yeah, we're gonna get into all of that and how this, like, how the hell did this happen, right? Why do all women, and really most people, why do people believe what they believe about feminism and gender equality, right? How did we get here? Because if you ask the average person on the street, they have some conception of it that goes like this. Prior to the 19th Amendment, which we passed in 1920, all women were very oppressed. They were slaves. They had no rights. They couldn't get educated. They couldn't do anything except be chained to the stove and forced to give birth and, cook meals for men. And they got beaten if they looked at a man wrong. And all these horrible things were legal. And so the women looked around and they said, oh, no, we're oppressed. We have to do something. And suddenly, for some reason, around the turn of the century, they start marching with signs and demanding rights until finally they get the right to vote. And then later they get birth control. And now they're trying to have careers and they can do anything a man can do. And this is what people think the history is. And the whole reason I wrote the book is because that's not at all how it happened. Not even close. So that's what we're going to get into in depth today. And hopefully we can unravel a lot of these bullshit myths that everyone believes are true because you've just heard them repeated.
Okay.
And why the myths are out there. So
okay, so where do you want to start?
Well, I'll start by saying that why is this important? Like you said, you feel this is important. Why is it important? It's because feminism is the greatest revolution of all time. I would say more than the technological revolution, the industrial revolution, the actual revolutionary period of the French and American Revolution. I think feminism trumps all of those. And the reason for that is it has changed everything about your world and your life in just 100 years. So we have many thousands of years of human history. And in just the last century, the entire social order and everything about the world has been completely inverted by feminism, by this women's liberation movement. Everything you know about your life, everything about the way your world works is affected by this one social revolution. So the way that families function, the way governments function, the way corporations function, the way day-to-day life is lived, the way we perceive ourselves, the way we have relationships with everyone we know, from friends to spouses to children, family, is all deeply, deeply affected by this one social revolution. And if it had been a grassroots movement that was born out of some need for freedom that women didn't have, that might be one thing. But when you go back and actually investigate, see what I do, I'm kind of like Jay Dyer, who's a good friend of mine. I go back and read all of the nerdy feminist writings from the 1800s and even further back than that, because nobody else wants to read that shit. It's horrible. It's garbage. It's boring. It's terrible. So this is why you should buy my book and support my work, because I had to sit here and read this crap for the last 5 years to help you all out with this. But if you go back and read the writings of feminists themselves, even the biggest ones that we all know, like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, you go back and read their writings. They say themselves in the history of women's suffrage that the biggest obstacle to women's liberation was women. Women did not want it. Not only did they not want it, it was so deeply unpopular. Like here in the United States, for example, when they were trying to pass suffrage laws, they actually had some referendums in multiple states. Massachusetts, I think, was the biggest one. So they actually put on the ballot for women, would you like to have the right to vote on the ballot? Do you even want the right to vote? And for all the women that bothered to come out and vote, only 4% of them wanted suffrage. 4% of women wanted suffrage. So you know what they did? The National Association of Women's Suffrage blocked all further referendums and said women cannot have the right to vote about whether they want the right to vote.
That's great.
Who knows that, right? Do you get taught that in high school? If you go to your women's studies program, do you ever hear about that? No, you don't. There's also a wonderful professor named Joe C. Miller who did a really extensive study of all the women's history textbooks that are in the biggest colleges in the United States from around 1920 until the late 1990s. And what he found is that they gradually over time edited out all the parts of this history that I'm about to go over with you guys and explain, and they changed it. And this really started in 1970 with the founding of the women's studies departments in the big universities, which was funded by the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation. All the tinfoil hat folks out there probably already know about the Rockefeller and Ford Foundations and some of the shenanigans that they're up to. But of course, they funded this and created this as an academic discipline. And so they are the gatekeepers of the history. And so they have sanitized it, they've whitewashed it, and they have turned it into a history that is, of course, beneficial to this feminist ethos. Why? Because who the hell goes to become a women's studies professor besides someone who is already convinced and like a militant feminist, right? Those are the only people who want to become a women's studies professor. So the history has been co-opted, gatekept, whitewashed into this thing that we all hear, that women were oppressed and enslaved and the evil patriarchy just wanted to keep its boot on women's throats until, you know, the good feminists came along and liberated everyone. So that's the reason why we have this false view of history. But yeah, I think it's super important. And I think the first step to untangling this god-awful mess we're in is letting people know that what you think you know about feminism isn't true at all.
And for me, it's just like, I don't know. It's like such an interesting, because, you know, I'm 51 years old. And I've seen like this incredible like explosion in like culture that like, you know, started off as like, hey man, free will and the, you know, free spirit in the 70s. And then it just exploded into like debauchery and all that stuff. And the invisible hand that might be behind all that to push this narrative or push that narrative, you know. But as I do the show's like 7.5 years old. You know, in December will be 8 years. I'm so excited about that. And
oh, congratulations!
Thank you. It's
That's
like
awesome.
It's a blessing. It's a real blessing that anyone listens to the show. We're so thankful for everybody. But I've been on this spiritual journey, you know, and you know, I just start getting in high vibrational, low vibrational, and like what modern day culture pushes on young women seems to be this low vibrational thing. You know, I used to way back in the day have a show called The Naughty Show, and we would interview all these, well, I called them outlaws at the time. They were kind of on the outside of mainstream entertainment, and they got all the accolades for being an outlaw, and they got all the hatred for being an outlaw, and that was the life that they lived. And they were crazy. They had a lot of abuse in the past, a lot of drug addiction, and a lot of them aren't here anymore. And that was just the darkness of that. But I see this kind of push with like OnlyFans and all that stuff. Like the main, even the trans stuff I'll put into that. The mainstreaming of this, what I, you know, again called the outlaw lifestyle, onto normies and mainstream, and like the devastating effects that has when you're not built for that life. It seems like wonderful, and it seems like fun, and it seems like empowering. And you know, it's like it's so funny to me because you always hear like, "Oh, you just want me barefoot and pregnant." I'm like, well, it sounds like the only thing you don't like about that is that you don't have nice shoes on, because women love shoes, right? So you're barefoot and you don't have some. But like I don't know, women seem to love to be pregnant. Every time I see them, they're like taking all 1,000,000 pictures. I don't know why but we have the demonization of that. And you know, and then we have this whole thing with like the feminism is slinging ass everywhere, and like that is somehow empowering. And like, don't get me wrong, this is a room full of like guys who love you know fast women. Like we grew up like that, but as I get older, I start realizing like it's, you know, like, what's sad? It's not super. Hold on, it's not super. It's not good for your spirit and your soul, and you're entering a very low vibrational world that sometimes socially you can't come back from.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about where this starts. So my book starts back in ancient times, because this goes all the way back to the beginning of human existence, where, if you guys recall, in your Bible, you had Adam and Eve, right? But what a lot of people maybe are less familiar with, that feminists love, is an entity called Lilith. Are you guys familiar with Lilith?
Yep.
Okay. So she is kind of a myth that comes out of, early Kabbalah and some other kind of esoteric traditions, where she is rumored to be the first wife of Adam that refused to submit. She refused to be under him when they were, doing the thing. And so she would not get under him. So she flew off into the sea and rebelled, and they tried to make a deal with her where they said, look, you have to come back and be Adam's wife. Otherwise, 100 of your demon babies, apparently she has these demon children that she creates somehow, they're going to die every day. So you have to come back. She wouldn't come back. And the legend is basically that she's this succubus demon that kills infants. And our words, I don't know what words we can say here.
You can say anything you want.
Okay. She basically rapes men in their sleep. She's like a succubus demon or an incubus demon that will rape you in your sleep if you're a man. So in the ancient world, they had all these protections against her. They'd put amulets over baby cribs, and men would be like really careful if they were sleeping in a house alone to not let Lilith in. And she's become, in modern times, like since the 70s, and especially lately with TikTok. If you guys haven't ever tried the hashtag witch talk, give it a shot if you want to go down a crazy rabbit hole of feminism. They love Lilith. They think Lilith is their hero. They hold her up as this like goddess figure of what they want to be, like this in permanent rebellion against men, right? And so even from ancient times, we have these myths like her. We have in Hinduism, they have the goddess Kali, who, by the way, was chosen to be on the cover of the first issue of Ms. Magazine. And we'll get into the founding of Ms. Magazine and who funded it and Gloria Steinem and all that stuff. But they put the Hindu goddess Kali on the cover of the 1972 debut issue of Ms. Magazine, which when I was researching, I thought, this is a very bizarre choice. If you're trying to sell a magazine to suburban American women in 1972, why would you put a blue-skinned, six-armed Hindu goddess on the cover, right? Seems weird. So I look into her and I immediately understood why. And the reason is because Kali is like this dark mother goddess in the Hindu religion who is a creator, but also a destroyer of worlds. And her consort Shiva, like her male counterpart, had to throw himself under her feet to keep her from destroying all of the world in a fit of probably hormonal induced rage, I would guess. To snap her out of it. And she demanded this blood sacrifice of men, especially on the battlefield and things like this. And if you look it up in the Guinness Book of World Records, the most prolific serial killer cult in all of history is one of her cults called the Thuggies, which is where we get our English word thug from. And for 800 years in India, this cult kind of ran wild and would kidnap people who were on trade routes and things like that and sacrifice them, but only men, because if you tried to sacrifice a woman, she would smite you out of existence. So they would particularly kill men and sacrifice them to Kali. So of course, Gloria Steinem decides this is who we need on the cover of the first feminist magazine, right? This vengeful, man-hating kind of goddess that kind of tells you everything you need to know about what the feminist movement was about. So this is like a very ancient idea of women rebelling. And even in the Bible, it says in the curse, when Eve is given her curse, the serpent has to be crushed under the foot of humanity, and he has to crawl on his belly. Adam has to toil under the sun to provide sustenance for himself and his family. And Eve gets the curse that she's going to have to give childbirth in pain, and that she will always desire to kind of usurp her husband's authority and want to rule over him, but won't be able to. So this is like an ontological issue that we as women have, that we always want to, our desire is for our man. We want our man, but we also have this constant struggle to lord over him instead of him being the leader of us.
All right, guys, real quick, I want to tell you about our boy James McMahon and Copy My Crypto. The crypto markets are on fire, and you need someone to help lead you through it. Let me tell you about James McMahon and Copy My Crypto. Has it pissed you off to watch crypto fly up in prices for a decade, and you still have done nothing about it. It makes sense. Crypto's complicated and really boring. Well, here's the good news. You don't need to know a thing about crypto to make money like so many have. The CopyMyCrypto.com membership site shows you the exact cryptos that YouTuber James McMahon personally owns, which means you just got to copy him. It's like having a big brother who knows what he's doing. You don't need to know a thing about crypto or how to invest. Just simply copy along. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about James. He runs the Crypto with James YouTube channel, which has over 54,000 subscribers. In the summer of 2020, he told his viewers to buy 26 cryptos. Had you put $100 into each, it went on to be well worth $123,000. Of the 26 cryptos, his top pick of the year, the one he singled out called Phantom, went up 692 times from when he said to buy it, okay? That one call alone has retired a number of people, including guys in the 20s and 30s. Remember, this is public knowledge. You can go to YouTube and verify for yourself. So if you'd like to join the 2,800 members who have copied James, then pause what you're doing and head over to copymycrypto.com/TFH. That's copymycrypto.com/TFH. That's TFH. You'll not only find proof of everything I said, but my viewers will get a full access for just $1. Yes, you've missed out on Bitcoin, but there's over 2 million other cryptos. Do you really think you've missed out on all of it? Guys, don't waste your time. Go to the site and read it. Once again, that's copymycrypto.com/TFH. Guys, it's ended money worries for so many. It may just do the same for you. Copymycrypto.com/TFH. It's very weird because there's a lot of like in the BDS world. You hear people talk about this all the time, the BDSM, where they're like, you know, to be a submissive in that is empowering, but somehow being submissive to your husband is like being degraded and oppressed. It's such an interesting thing. Have you ever looked into the demiurge?
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know,
absolutely. That's like a very Gnostic framework, and feminism has a lot of really Gnostic stuff tied up in it, for sure.
Isn't she, his mother, Sophia, technically the first feminist of all time? Because she's like, I can make a baby without you. And then she makes him and she's like, I fucked up. This ain't a good idea. And then he's like, I'll show you I'm going to be the god. And according to the Gnostics, he creates everything. But yeah, I mean, like, that is literally the first time feminist shows up. Yeah, we've heard about the Thuggies a long time ago. We had a guest on, and he, you know, about the whole how they kill. It's like super interesting, dude. Yeah. So yeah, this resonates. It's you're totally right about the whole thing about, you know, wanting to like love their man, but also completely and utterly control them. Yes. And it gets to this thing that like older men will tell younger men when it comes to being in a relationship is like, pick your battles. You know, like, right? Like, if it's not important, let her choose. Like, don't put your foot down until it absolutely matters. Everything else, let it go, let it go, let it go. And that's my honest opinion.
Oh, yeah, totally. The way that we kind of got here is during the Revolutionary period. So you might wonder, like, okay, we have maybe, depending on how you view it, 6,000 to 10,000 years of recorded human history. Why, if this started in the ancient world and that spirit was always there, this revolutionary spirit of woman and feminism was always there, why did it not saturate the culture the way it has until so recently? And I think it is because the Industrial Revolution and technology is what allows women to have this illusion that they don't need men. So where we see feminism really start to take off is during the French Revolution and the American Revolutionary period, with Mary Wollstonecraft, who writes A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in response to an English lord who had written A Rights of Man, right? And so she writes this first feminist, like widely publicated pamphlet. Now, this is another thing you guys are going to notice. We hear that women weren't allowed to do anything. They couldn't be educated. People think they couldn't go to school. They couldn't read. They couldn't do anything. That's all bullshit. Even in a lot of third world cultures, women had tons of rights and things that they could do. But in Western culture specifically, we'll just stick to that for the sake of brevity here. Women have been able to own businesses and own land and get educated and do all kinds of things throughout Western history. And I detail that in chapter 3 of my book. I take a whole chapter to kind of debunk this myth that women were never allowed to do anything, that there was some conspiracy of men to just keep women down so that they could be controlled and used for sex objects. It's completely untrue. Women owned land in ancient Greece. Women owned bars, taverns, all kinds of different businesses in England through the Middle Ages and things like that. So this idea that women could never do anything is baloney. And in America, since we have been keeping track, we started tracking these stats in 1790 of like high school graduation and literacy rates. And women have always outpaced men in literacy rates and high school graduation rates since 1790. Okay. So this idea that y'all have that women were not allowed to, that women weren't allowed to do anything is baloney. And why would that be? Well, it was very practical. And this is another recurring theme. There were reasons for these things. It wasn't just men wanted to keep women as sex slaves. There were like practical reasons for why things functioned the way they did for so many centuries and millennia, right? Because the men at 8th grade, it's like, okay, you need to go work on the farm, or you need to go to the factory, or you need to go fight on the front lines in a war. We didn't take a lot of extra time and effort to educate men in the academic realm because women were generally the ones who were at home teaching children how to read, write, and all that sort of thing before the public school system. And men would often be working and building the nation and defending the nation because that was their job. So no, there was never this like widespread oppression. Were there some Ivy League colleges who didn't let some women into some fields? Sure, but they also didn't let men in. This is something that is also widely misunderstood. Did you know that in England, men only gained universal suffrage 10 years before women did?
What?
Yeah, nobody ever tells you that. People have this idea that all men everywhere have always had all the power and all the rights. Completely untrue. So there was no conception of people's rights until after the revolutionary period to begin with. You had monarchs and you had a feudal system and other similar types of systems throughout history. But we get to the period where we start instituting democratic nation states in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Most men could not vote either. You had to like own land. You had to be a certain age. It depended where you were, right? What the stipulations were. But it was like very restrictive, and only a certain percentage of men could vote until right before women got the vote. So that's one thing I think people should know. And that, yeah, women could own property and they could do all kinds of things. Now, you'll hear feminists say, but we couldn't have credit cards and bank accounts until the 70s. True. But why, right? Why? Well, the reason for this is that up until 1970, women couldn't be held legally liable for supporting their families or for debts. So women could go down to the department store, say in 1850, if you went down to Bloomingdale's when it was brand new in New York in the middle 1800s, and a wife wanted to rack up a little bit of a credit line, buy some dresses, buy some housewares, she would do it under her husband's name. So he would have a credit line at the store, and she'd be an authorized user on the account, and she could buy things, but the husband was the one legally held responsible. And if a woman in New York got divorced, they have an old pamphlet, like a flyer that they printed in the early 1900s that showed this, where the anti-suffrage groups who did not want women's liberation said, look, we have all these privileges under male suffrage that we don't want to lose. Right now, even if we enter a marriage as a wealthy woman and we marry a poor guy, he is still responsible for all the family debt, all the support of all the children. So if for some reason I do get a divorce, which was rare, but if I was granted a divorce, he's still going to have to pay for everything, and I can take all my money with me when I go. So this idea that women were just oppressed and had no rights is baloney. Women were allowed to work. Most of them just didn't work because it didn't make sense. If you had an average of 5 to 7 children per family in 1890, why would you have the woman go work and send all those kids off to a daycare? You'd never, like, the math doesn't math on that, right?
It's just so crazy. It's just so crazy that they were sold this like, oh, dude, you can work and you can pay taxes and you could be held accountable for your debt. Isn't that awesome? I'd be like, it's not.
Now we have a situation where women earn the majority of college degrees. They far outpace men in college attendance and getting
even when I went to school, that was it. I mean, that was a selling point of the college. Dude, it's 4 chicks to 1 guy. I'm like, sign me up, dude. Let's go.
Right. So, but what comes with that is that women now hold the majority of college debt. So the average woman graduates from college with $40,000 in debt. That's only the average. A lot of them, it's a lot more. So we tell women to do this absolutely insane thing. And this is what happened to me. And this is how I started researching. This is kind of what got it going for me. I was always in like smarty pants kid programs in school. And I was told from kindergarten, you will go to college and you will have a career because that is what a successful woman does. And you're a smart girl. And this is what you need to do. Before you even think about getting married or having kids, go get your college degree and start your career. Then you can have kids. Okay, well, by the time I got done with high school, I had figured out that school was not for smart people, and it was not about learning. I had figured that out, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I even had a college scholarship that I turned down because another 4 years of that system, I was just like, no, absolutely not.
I am with you.
So I didn't do that, and I had my first child at 20, and everyone told me my life was over. They were like, oh, what a waste. Rachel's never going to do anything with all that brain power she has, and all her talents are just going to be wasted because she's just a mom. And I was like, do you want the dumb girls having all the babies? That doesn't make sense to me. Like, you only want the like low IQ women to be having kids. You don't want the smart women reproducing. So I just ignored them. But, you know, I had my first daughter at 20 and everyone told me, you've got to go back to work. And I remember her only being like 3 or 4 weeks old and driving her to a daycare. And I'm in the car thinking, wait, so I'm going to take my daughter to some other random woman and pay half of what I make at my job, which I don't really care about now that I've had a baby. I'm going to pay half of what I make for some other woman to be her mom all day. And then I get to see her like 2 hours before I have to put her to bed and do this shit all over again. Why? So I can pay taxes, so I can pay daycare. This seems like a stupid, inefficient, dumb system. Who the hell came up with this? And that was kind of like the beginning of me starting to realize this is kind of a scam and like who came up with this, right? And then, you know, a decade of research later, I find out all kinds of crazy stuff. But that's basically what we've done is we've convinced women that motherhood is for losers and women who can't hack it in the career world. And that what you really need to do is spend all your fertile years going to university and starting a career. And then all of a sudden at the age of like 30, which is the average age a woman first gets married in this country now, and we're having babies on average for the first time at like 30, 31 years old, that you're suddenly going to flip a switch at 30 and become a homemaker. You're going to suddenly be a mom now after you've spent your whole life up until that point grooming yourself to be a career woman. And we wonder why the birth rate is 1.6 kids per woman and why every nation touched by feminism is well below replacement at this point.
You're so right. We've been discussing this so much on the show. It's just like, I'm not saying women shouldn't be educated. I have 2 daughters. I want them to do whatever they want to do. But there's something is happening in the education system that is convincing women having children is a bad idea. And you're so right, because what they'll do is they'll tell you like, oh, these kids, these debt, kids create debt and take blah, 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 blah. Well, I mean, how much is the joy of your child's laughter worth? You know, like I can't express that enough. Like my kids' laughter, how much that, like, every time you work, you're like, that's what it's all about. The notion of being a mother, there's like, listen, everyone has some weird, there's people out there that have weird relationships with their mother. We're not saying that every mom is perfect, okay?
Right.
But man, people love their mothers. Mother,
Yeah.
I mean, like the joy that a mother sees when she sees her kids or her grandkids, and you think that's like degrading? Like,
Right. Well, this is me being rebellious. I was like, screw you, I'm going to have 5, right? I had 5. Now we always say we wish we would have done 6 or 7, but all that aside, so now that we just talked about that, let's talk about who had a vested interest in the system we're dealing with now. Who had an interest in telling all the women to do this? Like, that didn't come out of thin air. It didn't just start for no reason. So if you go back to the 1800s in America and England, and you have the Industrial Revolution has just popped off, and you've got these factories springing up, and we're switching over from monarchies to nation states. We're switching over from agrarian lifestyles to more industrialized society. So everyone's moving out of the country and they're moving into these urban centers to work in factories. Well, the wealthy industrialists who own all these factories need cheap labor, and they need a lot of it, and they need it fast. And so here in the United States, they couldn't import enough immigrants fast enough. Like, they did get quite a few here, but it just wasn't enough. And so a lot of these wealthy industrialists, like Cornelius Vanderbilt, okay, the Vanderbilt family, they need a lot of cheap labor. And so we're talking late 1800s, 1860s, 70s. Cornelius Vanderbilt hooks up with this woman named Victoria Woodhull, who was actually the first woman who ever ran for president. And she was on a ticket with, oh gosh, his name's escaping me, the freed slave that everybody knows who ran for president. They kind of, they weren't serious.
Douglas?
Nobody really voted for, yes,
Frederick
Douglass. Yes, she was on a ticket with him. It was like a freedom party or something, because they were both free love advocates, and they were both up to, they knew how to party, let me tell you. They were up to some shenanigans too. But
if I was a freed slave, that's all I would do is party.
That's what he did. And he liked the white ladies, I'll tell you that too.
God, I've never heard that before.
He was friends with Victoria Woodhull, who she and her sister were snake oil salesmen, like literal snake oil salesmen. They got this business from their father. They would go around the country selling fake cancer cures, fake medicines. They would scam people. They were wanted in multiple states for scamming people. Like, a lot of people died because these women sold them like phony baloney cures to different diseases.
Unbelievable.
And she said that she had a dream. Now, this is something in the middle 1800s. You'll hear a lot of the feminists say that they were possessed by spirits, that they had ghosts of ancient people who possessed them and told them to do things. They would say they were automatic writers, fortune tellers, clairvoyants, things like this. Part of it is there was a big spiritualism thing happening in the United States at that time. But the other reason is they could get away with a lot of behavior under that guise that they couldn't get away with otherwise, right? If you said that the spirit of Demosthenes possessed you and told you to go to New York and meet Cornelius Vanderbilt and help him game the stock market, you could kind of get away with some of that craziness a little easier. That's exactly what she did. She and her sister went to New York. They met up with Cornelius Vanderbilt, who had a lot of stock in the stock market. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country at the time. And during the black market crash of 1869, I think it was, she helped him game the stock market. He knew exactly what to do, what things to pull out of the day before this crash happened, and he made $26 million in their money. So converted to today's dollars, he made $26 million. And all the newspapers came and asked him, wow, you're the only person who didn't get absolutely, didn't lose their ass in this first huge stock market crash. How did you do it? How did you know what to do? And he said, do as I do, consult the spirits. So he said she was a fortune teller and that she contacted the spirits and they told her what to do. Well, that's not true. What really happened is this lying-ass bitch, she had a prostitution ring. She was a madam. She had a bunch of prostitutes in New York City that slept with a lot of the Wall Street bankers and the Wall Street traders and would spy on them and collect intelligence and give it back to her, and then she would report it to Vanderbilt. Whoa. So he got insider trading tips from this prostitution ring that this woman was running, and of course she did this all under the guise guise of free love, which she said the spirits told her to promote free love, promiscuity, open marriage. Sound familiar? Sound anything like today?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's how he gamed the stock market. And when he made that $26 million, he gave a good bit of it to Victoria and her sister. And they did two things with that money. One is they started the first female-owned stock brokerage trading firm on Wall Street. The other thing they did was start one of the nation's first socialist newspapers, and she published the Communist Manifesto in English for the first time. Thanks, Victoria Woodhull. So yeah,
that's crazy. That's so crazy how the same story just gets used over and over and over again. And you know what's so nuts about that is like that story is very similar to Watergate. And like the story that we're told is like, dude, this guy broke in and the security guard found him and all this stuff. Like, oh my God. And like in reality, it was a bunch of dudes were spilling the beans to hookers. And and that's what really Watergate was about. The story of the break-in was the smoke screen to a giant prostitution ring was going to bring down Washington, D.C. Unbelievable, dude. Hey, guys, real quick, I want to tell you about our friends at Fume, the award-winning, innovative flavored air device. Let me tell you about Fume. Listen, have you heard that flavored air category is quickly becoming the leading alternative vaping and smoking? It's a whole new movement towards better habits, led by our sponsor, Fume. Dude, we love Fume. Look at that website. It's so pretty. Flavored air isn't like vaping. If vapor was compared to sticky soda, Fume cores are closer to herbal teas. I like that. Fume has lots of delicious flavors to choose from, like crisp mint or orange vanilla. With flavored air, you can satisfy your oral fixation through a passive diffusion system that utilizes no electronics, no vapor, no combustion. Thank you, dude. Fume continuously invests in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products, okay? Fume is backed by doctors in the U.S., all right? Dude, we love all, orange vanilla all day, every day, okay? Orange vanilla all day, every day, dude.
That one right there, right?
Well, look at that, bro. That is a party in my mouth and everybody's coming. You know it, okay? Fume has served over 300,000 customers, and you can be the next success story. For a limited time, use tinfoil to get a free gift with your journey pack. Head to tryfume.com. That's tryfume.com and use the code tinfoil or scan the QR code on screen, okay, to get a free gift with your order today, okay? Bang, bang, pow, guys. I love Fume. You love Fume. Johnny loves Fume. Look at all their 5-star reviews. Fume is the award-winning flavored air device, and we thank them for sponsoring this show.
Yeah, so this happened in 1869 as well. It really is the same. I mean, you just notice these patterns, right, throughout history, the same kind of things happening over and over again. My personal belief is it's the same spirits behind it, and we can talk about that. But I have another story that's just like this. So if you're wondering, how the hell did they pass suffrage if nobody wanted it? If women were like, wanted nothing to do with it, which they didn't. They were like, if you go back and check, anti-suffrage groups had far higher membership among women than pro-suffrage groups. Like I said, it was wildly unpopular with women. Women wanted nothing to do with women's liberation. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton says herself in her memoirs that it wasn't because she said the reason we can't get women on board is not because, you know, they're oppressed and they love their slavery. It's because they have everything they want. If they want to work, they can. If they want to go to university, and they can. But most of them just want to raise their kids together. They want to have community. They want to have their sewing circles, and they want to plan community events and run the churches. And they have a lot of influence already. They had women's groups that had a lot of political influence. without them being a voting bloc. And those women who were against suffrage said, look, we don't want to just be another voting bloc, because right now we're apolitical, and that gives us this moral high ground. So if we ask for clean milk, safe parks, more schools, and we go to legislators with this, they tend to listen to us because we're not just another lobbying group, and we don't want to lose that moral high ground that we have. And they had many other really good reasons. They didn't want to get drafted into the military. They were like, look, if we're equal with men, where's our argument to not be in the draft? We don't want to have to do jury duty. We don't want to have to do all of the difficult, dirty, dangerous things that men have to do, right? We've got our own sphere of influence, and we've got our own things we're concerned with. We don't want this. And the reason it was forced through, again, was through some really wealthy industrialists in the progressive era. Now I'm going to name some names. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. So we have the Vanderbilt family and the Belmont family. How'd she do this? Well, Alva was, she married Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandson. So the same guy who gamed the stock market, his grandson, William K. Vanderbilt, married Alva when she was young. And they got divorced. She was granted one of the first divorces, and it was on grounds of adultery. He was a bit of a philanderer. So she was granted a divorce and got a lot of his huge, like, golden era mansions that had all the marble. If you've seen all those really fancy progressive era mansions, she inherited a bunch of properties and one of the biggest divorce settlements in all of history at that time. And she married his best friend, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont.
Scandalous.
And Belmont was a Rothschild banker. So he actually was sent to Europe to learn the Rothschild banking system and how they do their accounting and their central banking practices. And so he was a really wealthy guy too. And she married him, and then he got very sick and died. So she had this double windfall of these two huge fortunes. She was one of the wealthiest women on planet Earth. And she was kind of a man hater. She wasn't exactly fond of men. And she thought, I'm going to dedicate all of my fortunes to helping the suffrage cause and this women's liberation movement. So you guys might know that a lot of the suffragists were kind of terrorists. They would do mail bombings, firebomb businesses.
I never knew that. You know that? There was a bunch of feminist terrorists out there? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. Here and in England, the Pankhurst family in England, and then a lot of the suffragists here, they would put bombs in the mail. They would bomb businesses. They would smash storefront windows in protest, and they would get taken to jail. And the feminists will tell you, oh, they all went on hunger strikes and they really suffered for the cause. It's not really true. It's kind of bullshit, because the men who had to arrest these women and take them to prison were kind of like, ugh, just women problems, right? These women are probably, it's their monthly and they're angry, and so they're bombing things. So they would they didn't want to, but they would arrest them, and then they'd get bailed out all the time, like hundreds of them. By the hundreds, they'd get bailed out all the time. Well, it was because Alva Belmont and a lot of these other wealthy people who backed suffrage would bail them out. So they'd say, go ahead and do the terrorist act. You're going to get arrested. It's fine. We'll just bail you out and you'll be back out in a couple of days.
And that just happened too. That just happened with Antifa.
Just like with Antifa.
And BLM and all these Hollywood jackasses. Bail. You remember when, like, Patton Oswalt and what's his face from The Office? What's the lead guy?
Steve Carell.
Steve Carell and Seth Rogen were just like bragging about all the people they were bailing out. I'm like, what are you doing?
No, I don't remember that actually.
Yeah.
They were bailing people out of jail.
They were yelling, bail. I got it, bail. They were just tweeting about it left and right. And real quick before we move on is that, you know, when you talk about, like, the problem with suffrage is that everyone was happy. That was a big part when communism tried to come to America. And they were like, oh, dude, it's hard to get these workers motivated because they're all really happy with their jobs and how it's going. They're like, we have to be submersive here, and we have to be subversive. That's the word, to get this done, because they're actually enjoying their lives and they're happy with what's going on.
Oh, yeah, because remember that this suffrage stuff is going on prior to the income tax, prior to the Federal Reserve Act. We're in an area of American history where you do have a free market to a large degree. You only have localized banks. You have a lot of capital. You have cheap land. You have money that's actually worth something. So yes, it was very hard to convince women that they needed to go to work. They were like, what? What are you talking about? Why would I want to go work in a gross factory all day when I can stay in my nice house and have this great standard of living, and just my husband goes and works and I hang out with my sisters and my cousins and my friends and we raise our kids to get like, they were like, what are you talking about? There was not this great motivation in women like, we want careers and we want to go work in the factory. They didn't want that to an extremely large degree.
What do you think they wanted, though? What did they really want? Because you kind of talk about, like, you know, when we talk about feminism, how, like, and the joke is women aren't fighting for the right to be a roofer, right?
Yeah.
Right.
They're fighting for the right to be like, well, who even knows what they're fighting for?
I want to sit in the corner office with my different colored highlighter pens, and I'm going to highlight this in pink, and then I'm going to highlight it in green, and I'm going to send a little email, and then I'm going to have a champagne brunch where I close a deal, and then I'm going to go to Paris, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what they think it's going to be.
Right,
that's not the reality, but that's what they think it's going to be. They think it's going to be Sex in the City.
And
you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's more like Mad Men, which ended well for nobody. Those guys all had heart attacks or ended up cracking up.
I don't want to be weird, but like, you're seeing a lot of male pattern baldness in females now, and I think a lot of that comes from stress. The stress,
for real?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're seeing women whose hairs are thinning like men do because the stress of work. There's a reason why we die earlier. You know, it's like stress and working all the time. You're like, I want that. No, you don't, man.
What was that?
No, you
I
don't.
think you Instagram retweeted or something. That girl that was crying because she had to work and she was on math. She looks like figured out the math. She's like, this isn't what I want.
Yeah, it's not. But you're told that you're bombarded with that. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like, what do you want? You want all the. You know, you see it all the time. It's like they want in on all the action. They want to call all the sports games. They want to do all the. I mean, like, that's the fun stuff. But not everyone gets
sucks.
it. And there's a lot of work with that. And that's a big part of the Me Too movement. This notion that if we just made it like more level. And they found out that the Me Too movement has done giant damage to women in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
But we'll get into that later.
For sure. Well, so this begs the question: if women didn't want this, how did it get passed, and why were these wealthy people backing it? You know, like it doesn't seem obvious why these wealthy industrialists wanted this. Well, one obvious reason is they wanted more cheap labor, right? And if you can convince women to go work in factories doing you put the screw in the pack 1,000 times a day, or you pull the lever 1,000 times a day, or you take this thing off of this and you put it over here. If you could get women to do this like low skilled, cheap labor, then you double the labor supply overnight, and you don't have to import a bunch of immigrants or any of that. So that's one obvious reason, but there's two bigger reasons. And so we just talked about Alva Vanderbilt Belmont and how she had married William K. Vanderbilt, who was one of the founding members of a little club you guys probably know about called the Jekyll Island Club.
We've heard of them.
Who met in secret to draft the Federal Reserve Act and create the Federal Reserve banking system. They secretly snuck off under the guise of we're going on a duck hunting trip, right? And they snuck off to Jekyll Island for 10 days and locked themselves in a room because they knew that if the media caught wind of what they were doing, it would never pass and they would never get it through Congress. So this was all very hush-hush and very sneaky. He was one of the big architects of this, along with J.P. Morgan and a few of the other really wealthy industrialist banker types. Same thing with Belmont. Her second husband was also completely wrapped up in this. So she had all this inside info, once again, in the banking elite families that were going to institute this Federal Reserve central banking system, and we're going to institute an income tax. So if you're going to do that, would you want to just tax one income per family, or would you want to be able to tax two incomes per family? And would you want people who, now you've got a two-income economy, you can't just support a family on one income anymore. So everybody is in this debt-based economy where you're perpetually in debt with your mortgage, you're perpetually in debt with your credit cards. You have to get college loans to go to college. It's a completely debt-based economy that wouldn't exist if we hadn't pushed women into it. If only men were working and going to university and doing all this stuff and getting loans, it wouldn't have done for them what this did. Because women own 80% of consumer debt now, I think it is. It's like insane. God. So, of course, these people had this vested interest in getting women out of the home and into jobs, into factories at the time, but really any kind of industry. And the other big reason that they wanted this is because all these folks were eugenicists. The Rockefeller family, the Morgans, the Vanderbilts, the Fords, all into eugenics. It was very popular at the time, around the turn of the century. They wanted birth control. They wanted smaller family size. They wanted to depopulate. So if women are all at home having babies all day, you're never going to have that. So you have to convince women that motherhood is oppressive and that it's dangerous and it's dirty. And we can get into Margaret Sanger and the Rockefellers and how they started Planned Parenthood and the birth control pill if you want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I mean, we've also had past guests on to talk about like the stress, anxiety. It makes it really hard to have children. It's like really hard to get pregnant. And, you know, again, if we go back to, if you study, like the human animal is different than any other animal out there. Like we are in a constant state of anxiety and fear. Yeah. Like, and through our social media, our television, all that stuff, constantly being told that death and destruction is right around the corner. And you know, when you study animals, like they'll get a heightened sense of anxiety when a predator's around, they'll escape and then they'll calm down. Humans aren't like that. It is so hard to have babies. Like always like that. It's like you're being chased by a tiger, but night and day, every single day, all your life. 100%. And like that is so hard to have children in. And now you think about, we got Johnny over here with a Citizens app showing us live footage of them they have a house invader like surrounded with guns. Yeah, you can watch that in like real time on the app now.
Well, and I saw there were multiple people doing the videoing. I guess they just have nothing better to do with their lives, and they were like up the street just videoing the whole thing.
I mean, all this is done to just get you the freak out. And then, you know, I mean, I don't know if we're going to get into this later, but like, what is the depopulation about? Like, how deep does that go? Okay, we'll get into that later, but it's like, this is such a layered thing that people don't even understand how they're acting in their own, not in their best interest at all. They're actually working against their best interest. Okay. Yeah. So let's get into the birth control and all that stuff.
Yeah. I homeschool my kids. So I was just talking to my two youngest daughters about this today. And I was saying how the reason mom's such a big history nerd is because if you don't understand the genesis of ideas, where certain ideas and concepts come from, how we got to where we are, what led up to all this, you cannot understand the world you live in. You just can't. So, like, this is why I'm always, you know, they're like, oh, mom, history again, really? But this is the reason why. So if you want to, everybody knows a little bit about Margaret Sanger. Everybody knows she wasn't fond of certain people groups, right? Yeah. She had some disdain for certain people groups that she thought shouldn't be reproducing. But what a lot of people don't know about her is, number one, her whole backstory was total bullshit. So she would go around giving speeches about her mother, and she would say, oh, I was one of 12 children. I came from this horrible Irish Catholic family, and my mother was so weakened from giving birth over and over again that she died. Well, that's not true. Her mother died from tuberculosis, completely unrelated to childbirth. Had nothing to do with that. But the reason she would tell this story is because she went around promoting that she said she was a midwife, or like a midwife's assistant, like a nurse. She spent like 6 months of her life kind of as a nurse. She really didn't do midwifery at all. And she had a fake story. And this comes from her biographers. Now, this chapter on Margaret Sanger, writing it for me was emotionally like horrible for me. I had nightmares. It was really rough because this woman, I think she was really demonic. Her own biographers say that she would always tell this story about a woman that she went to assist after she had had a botched abortion, and that the woman almost didn't make it, but they saved her. and that this male doctor came in and told the woman, you know, you can't be having abortions. And, you know, if your husband just wants you to keep having babies, you have to do it. And that she begged him to tell her how the babies were made so that she could avoid it. And that the male doctor refused. Okay. And this is like 1910 or something. My grandmother is 98 and she's still alive and she's still with us and she's awesome. And my great grandma lived to be 102. She was born in 1898.
Damn.
And I knew her. Yeah, I knew her really well, too. And I asked my grandma when I was writing the book, I'm like, Grandma, did great grandma know how babies were made? And she's like, of course. What? Yeah, of course we knew how babies were made. What do you mean? I'm like, well, Margaret Sanger says that y'all didn't know what it was that was causing the pregnancies. And she's like, no. She said, in fact, after my brother was born, you know, my mom had a really hard time. And they said, the doctor told her, you probably shouldn't have any more pregnancies. So, and she said, my parents knew how to get around it. Yeah, they didn't have the birth control pill. They didn't even have diaphragms yet. But my great grandma knew how to avoid the baby making part of things. Okay. But Sanger went around telling everyone, and she wrote this god awful book that is a complete forgery. It's total bullshit, where she says she was getting letters from thousands of women around the country saying, oh, I had 12 children by the time I was 25 and my uterus is just falling out and I can barely feed all of my poor children. And she just created this like propaganda campaign that all the women were stuck perpetually giving birth and they couldn't figure out how to not get pregnant, and that all the children were starving and the women were dying. She just painted this like horrible picture that's completely untrue. And in that book where she gives all these different case studies of all these different women, she published their letters to her, supposedly. I contacted the Margaret Sanger Papers Project, which is this, it's at a university, and it has, if Margaret Sanger ever, you know, blew her nose on a napkin, they have it. Okay. They've got everything she ever wrote, everything she ever did, all of her archives from both her sons are there. And I said, you know, she has this book and she says she received these thousands of letters from women who were oppressed by prolific childbirthing that they just couldn't stop. Can I read them? Where can I find the source material? Where can I find the letters? And they said, oh, well, of the thousands of letters that were written to her, we only have 3. And I said, out of thousands, you only have 3. She wrote a whole book. She had thousands of letters that she herself said she kept, and you have 3? And they said, yeah, we think that they were lost to time, or like she might have sent some of them to abortion doctors to encourage them to keep aborting babies. We're not really sure. They just, you know, they're just gone.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So, total bullshit. And by the way, the letters sound exactly the same. I think, honestly, I don't have 100% proof of this, but I think she made it up and she fabricated these letters. And the reason I have to believe that is that she fabricated so many things about her own personal life, her own story, because her own biographers say they cannot find this patient that she says she helped who almost died from the abortion. They can't find any record of that woman ever having existed. They can't find any documentation whatsoever that Sanger was actually a nurse under this particular doctor. And her biographers, who are generally fans of hers, do believe that she made that story up.
That's crazy. You know, that reminds me of, what's his name? George Santos. Is it George Santos or Greg Santos?
The loopy former.
Yeah. Who just made up all these stories and none of them were true. Because it doesn't, you know, it's just, sadly, there is no punishment for lying. And it sounds like even back then. And it is a manifestation of propaganda that all you have to do is say something they want you to say. Yes. They put it out to the mainstream. 2 weeks later, you can be like, that's not true. Doesn't matter. It's blood in the water. And people are just repeating it. They're just repeating. I mean, how many times you seen something's put out, later on you find it's not true, and it doesn't matter because people keep saying the same thing. You know, even with the masks right now, people still wearing the masks right now because a year ago, 2 years ago, even maybe today with their algorithm regurgitating old stories and telling them that wearing a mask is saving their lives. It's not saving their lives, but they don't care because they just heard it one time. It fits into their wiring. It's what their system wants to hear, and they just run with it. What's the old saying? Like, it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them that they've been fooled, or convince them they've been lied to. Yeah, it's like, that's exactly what's going on here. That's why she got promoted there. If you get into the darkness, the occult, the Satanism and all that stuff, that's why these people are pushed forward, because they are broken liars, and that's who they want to push forward as almost a demoralization campaign.
Yeah, that's literally exactly what happened. So she had joined a socialist club in New York when she was young, and she had just gotten married and had 3 kids and was not super fond of her husband. So she joined this socialist club in New York where she was sleeping around with a lot of people there, and got introduced to one of the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers had just started the Bureau of Social Hygiene, which was a eugenics organization to rid the population of the undesirables, right? To get rid of all these extra babies that we don't want, these mouths that we don't want to feed, the useless eaters. Everybody knows about the Rockefellers and how much they love Depop and all that. And if you go to the Rockefeller archives, by the way, they brag about all of this and tell you all of this themselves. They're very proud of it. But they loved Sanger, and they pushed her to the front. They funded all her campaigns. They gave her the money to start her clinic. She had a clinical research bureau that was Rockefeller funded, and she was hanging around and sleeping with all of the prominent eugenicist elites of the time. Her boyfriends included H.G. Wells, Havelock Ellis, and Simons, who was a guy that worked with Ellis and also worked with Magnus Hirschfeld. Don't know if you guys know about old Magnus Hirschfeld and his first transgender clinic in Germany, all that kind of thing.
No, I have not.
So she was very prominent in these circles, and she got there by sleeping with all these guys. They were all free love advocates as well, open relationship, bisexuals. Havelock Ellis was a super creeper. He wrote this book about inverted sexuality with Simons, and Ellis himself was having an affair with Sanger, but he also had a wife who was mainly a lesbian and was mostly with women. And he wrote in his own diaries about how he could not come to completion unless a woman peed on him. So these are the kind of people that are like telling us about social hygiene and what's good for society.
Yeah, it's always like that, right? They're such hypocrites. I think there's this notion that like everybody from the past were Puritans, and we're only like debaucherous now. I think the difference is we have phones with cameras in them. I think that's really the film it all, which I don't know if it's a good idea at all. No. But all this stuff was everywhere. Johnny, you just missed just bombs, bro.
Sorry, I've been drinking a lot of water today.
It's okay, but basically, Singer was banging the guy that opened up the first trans clinic.
His friend. Not Hirschfeld himself, but his friends, yes.
They opened it in Germany, which is, this ridiculous argument that people now are saying about Hitler. Like, the Nazis were like anti all this stuff. And it's just like, you guys and your revisionist history of bullshit. That may be true. Totally. That may be true that they burnt down that clinic, but they had other objectives. That was just a part of like the occult Nazis' whole game, which is to destroy Europe. That's my honest opinion.
Yes. There's going to be a ton about that in my second book, which will be out at the end of the year. Has a lot about all of that, and because the Nazis had a whole plan, they thought after we take over, we're going to institute polygamous marriage so that we can make lots more Ubermenches and all. So no, the Nazis were not some like pure Christian Puritans who were going to fix all the degeneracy. That's nonsense.
So after, if they would have won, according to them, they were going to have like orgies and stuff to have more Aryan babies?
Yes, they were going to institute a polygamous marriage thing because they said we won't have enough men after the war, so we're going to have to.
So we're going to have to bang all the chicks. Is that what they like? Oh, dude.
Oh, so
unbelievable. But they're gonna be. It looks like we're gonna. I don't want to do it, but I gotta do it
for the nation. It's we're patriots.
For the nation, not for me, because I enjoy it, but because of the nation.
Well, this is another interesting point because Sanger actually worked with Emil Kraepelin, who was in the Nazi regime and created the first birth control pill. They were doing all this eugenics research all this gene research and stuff in the 1930s. And the Rockefellers sent Sanger to Germany to meet with Emil Kraepelin to talk about and Gregory Pincus to start the birth control pill. So yeah, she was involved in that, and they were not sweetie pies who were just trying to get rid of degeneracy. Absolutely not. They were into other various forms of the occult, and they were into other various forms of feminism, which my second book focuses on the Marxist side of this and what was going on in Russia, Eastern Europe, all of that kind of craziness, because it's even wilder than the American version, which, if you can believe that. So no, Sanger was horrible. And after she passed away, a lot of the doctors who started Planned Parenthood came out and said that they had falsified a lot of the statistics. So when you hear the phrase back alley abortions comes from their propaganda campaigns, which were built on phony baloney, made up statistics. They would say, oh, women are dying in back alley abortions all the time. And you hear that repeated to this day,
yes.
And it was never true. If you actually look at the statistics Planned Parenthood itself recorded, I think before Roe versus Wade, the total number of illegal abortions in the United States was like just over 2,000. The minute that they made it legal, it jumped to like over 100,000 per year. And then by the 90s or 80s, it was 1.3 million at its peak per year. We never had 1.3 million illegal secret abortions. That is not true, and it's from their own records. And these doctors came out after the fact and said, yeah, we all lied. We all lied to get funding. We all lied to make this legal, and we had a lot of incentive to do that.
COVID.
So she basically, this woman just lied. Yes, just like that. They lie until they propagandize the public for support. So that's exactly what Sanger did.
That is incredible. And if you brought that up to anybody outside of this bubble of this conversation, and people who listen to this show and people who follow your work, Rachel, if you brought that up to anybody, they'd be like, dude, shut up. That's so disingenuous. Yep. Dude, you're saying that nobody died in back alley abortions? We're saying it wasn't real. And like this whole thing about, if they say trust the science, you know what I'm doing? Not trusting the science.
Yeah, exactly. I don't trust the science either.
So I'm 31 and I grew up and then we had like sex ed. And I remember right off the bat, they tell these girls to go on birth control. Shouldn't there be something about ovulating, teaching them about their bodies? Because that's not even mentioned. That's not even mentioned. I remember being, and I was like, at my age, I always ask a girl, do you want birth control? And it's like, if I say no, I'm like, okay, I gotta wear a condom. But I mean, I'm assuming that shouldn't have to be every time.
No,
so you're asking if you can hit it or not? Is that what you're asking?
Well, no. What
I'm
asking is usually the answer is every girl says yes, I'm on birth control, which I don't think the answer should be yes to every girl.
Yeah, who even gives a shit about STDs?
But listen, you're totally right about that, and we can get into that again about what it's doing chemically to women.
Yeah.
It is. We can get into
dude.
that.
There are women who have 3 periods a year, I mean,
they don't even understand it.
Well, and one of the things that they've started to consider is that women have lower, and I know you mentioned the stress thing, cardiovascular risk, possibly because of their periods. It has a cleansing effect on the blood. And think about it, if you're not having your period, at all, or a few times a year, that means implicitly that it's a risk factor for possibly CBD.
100%.
Well, and nursing, breastfeeding is very protective as far as hormonal cancers.
Oh, wow.
And so back in the day before birth control, you might not get that many periods over the course of your lifetime, but it's because you were pregnant or you were nursing. And then generally when you would stop nursing, you'd get your period back and probably shortly thereafter get pregnant again. But that's a whole different thing than taking exogenous hormones starting when you're 15 or 16 years old and taking them your whole life, convincing your body that it's pregnant and no pregnancy ever comes. That's a whole different thing. And it does all kinds of things to women.
Well, they give them to women for acne, right?
Yeah.
In their teenage years.
To regulate your periods, it's total baloney. This idea that 88% of all American women will be on birth control at some point in their lifetime. So, and by the way, this research for the birth control pill came out of partially a desire to figure out if we can swap genders. This research that was being done at Hirschfeld's clinic of trying to turn men into women, turn women into men, they were creating exogenous hormones and seeing if they could gender swap. And they figured out that it could make people infertile. And so that's kind of where the birth control pill comes from. And they thought this would be a great depopulation tool. So that's why the Rockefellers funded it.
Unbelievable. The psychological operations that are going in. Now I see in your notes, did we go into Freemasonry? And how?
We didn't, but we can.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that for sure.
Okay. So I have a whole chapter on this because Theosophy, if you guys don't know what it is, it's kind of a Western esoteric tradition that was made popular by Helena Blavatsky. She kind of cobbled it together herself for the most part. She was another scammer and liar who made up a lot of bullshit to promote her stuff. And she was a Western occultist, and she would blend like philosophies from India, Egypt, other parts of the East into Western esoteric traditions and created something called Theosophy. And it's kind of a scam religion. And I think she was widely rumored to be an intelligence asset. And this was one way for her to get in and out of India and the, regions of India where British people couldn't necessarily get. If you went there because you were on a religious journey or something, they would often let you into like places you couldn't always get into. So that was part of it. But I do think she believed in a lot of this stuff. And Theosophy was really prominent and popular throughout all of this time period we're talking about where feminism is taking off. And it was very conducive to feminist ideology because it had that goddess worship element. And it was a lot of these people were into the female empowerment stuff. Like Florence Farr was a very popular actress around the turn of the century in England. She had some of the same boyfriends as a lot of these people. They were all kind of screwing each other. So she had affairs with Aleister Crowley, W.B. Yeats, George Bernard Shaw, a lot of these guys in the Victorian period who were also into eugenics and into the occult. And she had her own temple. She was the first co-Freemason woman who had her own temple called the Isis Urania Temple. And she became famous for her ability to summon demons.
Oh, man, dude.
Yeah. She had her own flying scroll. She had her own ritual magic school.
Flying what? I'm sorry, flying what?
Her own
flying scrolls. It's an occult thing. Yeah, it's like this is all esoteric knowledge, right? So you create spells and magic rituals, and then you write them on a scroll, and it's very secretive, and people have to initiate into higher levels to get to the magic spells. It's all this kind of multi-level marketing for the spiritual.
That's so hilarious. That's so hilarious.
Yeah, so these women, Blavatsky and Farr, and then Alice Bailey were this occult stuff that they did let them into the mainstream media and, a lot of famous places with people who were famous and powerful and elites. And Bailey is the mother of the New Age, and she's instrumental in the founding of the UN. Now, why do we care about the UN if we're talking about feminism? Well, because the UN has all these initiatives, global initiatives for equality, gender equality, and women's health. Whenever you hear the UN talk about women and girls' health, I want you to know they don't give a shit about women and girls' health. They're saying that because it sounds really nice. Yeah. What it means, it's code for eugenics. It's code for we're going to give them abortion, we're going to sterilize them with vaccines, and we're going to get them all on birth control. That's what that means. So the UN founding in 1942, Alice Bailey was instrumental in this, and she was a student of Blavatsky. And Blavatsky was very feminist. She was very... Theosophy has this idea of you need the goddess element. So you can't just have men. You can't have patriarchy. You have to have matriarchy and goddesses and that sort of thing. So Bailey pushed all of her stuff into the UN. In fact, do you guys remember UN Assistant Secretary Robert Mueller? In the late 80s, 90s?
Oh, Robert Mueller, the investigator, Robert, yeah.
Yeah. He read a lot of Bailey, and he based his worldview on her, and he created the UNESCO World Core Curriculum based on Alice Bailey's Theosophical works. So the World Core Curriculum that the UN promotes in all the third world and everywhere else that the UN is based on occultism, and this is where they get the gender equality stuff. This is where they get the veganism, vegetarian, live in the pod, eat the bugs stuff is from Theosophy and Alice Bailey's World Goodwill NGO. She made this huge non-governmental organization that pushed, it created the UN Spiritual Caucus. Do you guys know, if you go to the UN building, which by the way is in a Rockefeller building, they have this black cube in there that they pray to? Have you guys heard of this?
Yeah, we have. Yeah. And it's insane to me because, again, that goes to the oldest of the gods, Kronos, who's Moloch and Baal. And, you know, it's so interesting because, like, all these people, it's like so crazy to me. What was that? Used to be in that in Smart Kids class. What was that called?
We called it AG, but there is another name for it. But it's academically and intellectually gifted.
The ACT program or something like that. I forget what the past guest said. Stephen, he called it. There was because right? It's very relevant, but it's like all they do is just they're constantly crunching data to find out. Through, like, back when before they had computers, dude, they just had people there going, who's talking, who do you find interesting, who's putting out interesting papers that fit our thing. And then when they find these people, right, they slowly but surely start to promote them. Like, you know, it's like, even like when I talk about Aleister Crowley, like he just took a lot of the old like Hermetic principles and flipped them and made them a cult. And then all of his friends were rich kids. So they just got pushed forward and made into this Paul Bunyan type guy. But, you know, he flew in somewhere and did karate against against all these British spies. And like he played chess against 1,000 people at one time while making love. Like everything's like Paul Bunyan bullshit with this guy. And they do that, but this is how they do it. They're just constantly finding data of people saying what they want to say and promoting it. And it's almost what P. Diddy said. Well, even all these guys who whether it's Bill Clinton, whether it's Puff Daddy, and I guarantee you Jeffrey Epstein somewhere in there, they have a crazy crime they committed. They know that they're sexual deviants, and they're like, we're going to make this go away, but you're going to play ball. This is how they do it. They're always constantly mining data on who's pushing a narrative or who's a useful idiot that they can push forward.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And that's when the UN was being founded. Bailey already had a lot of followers who were in that circle of UN founding people. So when they created the UN Spiritual Caucus, I don't know why the UN needs a spiritual caucus, but it was filled with Bailey followers. And that's why they created this prayer room with the black cube. And it was so funny because during COVID, they had a link where you could join. So if you couldn't go there in person, you could join and do their one world religion, new world order, black cube prayers with them virtually. It's the wildest shit. But they instituted like the Feinhorn Foundation. So the UN has all these crazy NGOs that promote veganism, the climate crisis nonsense, the gender equality stuff. They love esoteric religions like Wicca, the goddess worship stuff, all the occult stuff. And they want a one world religion, a one world government, all this sort of thing. And that's what Bailey promoted. That's exactly what she promoted. And of all the horrible feminist writers, her stuff is the worst to read. It's like the most mind-numbing, god-awful, nonsensical crap I've ever come across. But she was one of the main people directing the founding of the UN, which is today like extremely powerful and influential, and was behind a lot of the COVID stuff, and it's behind a lot of the climate stuff. So if you wonder, you'll notice this thread, you'll always see socialism, which is the same thing as the one world government stuff, the NWO stuff, socialism, communism, one world order, mixed with veganism, like this radical climate, Mother Earth worship, veganism stuff mixed with feminism. And that's why in the 70s you had Wicca taking off, you had goddess worship taking off, you had these eco-terrorist feminists, Abby Rockefeller being one of the most radical ones in the 70s. And these feminist separatists that wanted to live in female witch covens where there were no men, all this craziness goes together. And the reason it goes together is because it comes from this earth worship, mother goddess stuff. Like, ultimately, that's kind of the belief system. That's one of the reasons the book is called Occult Feminism. That's because it comes from the occult, a lot of this stuff. But the other reason is occult just means hidden. And this whole history is hidden. Nobody knows about it. And when I started finding all this, I was like, why does nobody know about it? I've never read a book about it. I don't know anyone else who's ever put this all together. And my husband was like, you got to do it. He's like, the kids are getting older and you have some time, like, do a book, you know? He's like, you got to put this out there because it's so wild. Because I would always come in and be like, oh my God, you're not going to believe the new crap I found this week, you know? And he was just like, this is so bizarre.
You know what this reminds me of a lot of when we have people on and they talk about the belief that Einstein was a fraud and that so much of Einstein's stuff comes from his wife. And he straight up stole ideas, repackaged them as him. He was like the Carlos Mencia of physics, dude. I just Mexican it up, and then he just put it out right. And dude, it's kind of crazy, man. It's kind of crazy how they do that over and over and over again. And to me, the reason they want to do it, and I'd like to get into the CIA part of this as well, but the reason they do that is so that they can control the message. And you see that with like Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? Like right now, dude, he's in worlds where you're like, why are you here right now? Like why are you discussing gender and women in sports? You're like, oh, because when COVID came out, you were telling everybody not to worry about it. And suddenly some sexual assault, sexual harassment, allegedly stuff started coming out. And boy, he got right back in line real quick to the point now he's saying absolutely ridiculous shit. Dude, that's not even your lane, bro. It's like him and Bill Nye. Bill Nye is like, why, you're just an architect. You're not a scientist. Why are you over here trying to tell everybody about this, and that?
So you think they got something on Bill Nye as well?
I think they got. I think they control all these people. I don't think it's about money or power. I think they catch them in something. They catch them in a crime, or something. And then they just basically, they tell them without telling them, or they tell them, hey, we're going to make this go away, but you're going to dance for us. And if you don't, we're going to slow leak this out.
So do you think like with these Twitchers and influencers and like Logan Paul, do you think they already had something on Logan Paul before they let him get big? And they're like, here you get big, let him get big. And they're like, we knew you had done this already.
I don't know what the answer to that is. I think everyone who ever blows up on the internet is big. I don't know. It's possible. I don't know. I think there's people who somewhat are part of things that weren't big, that because they work really hard, suddenly blow it up, like podcasting. Like, podcasting always wasn't big. It was just a bunch of people that couldn't get jobs in radio or television wanting to figure out how they could reach an audience. And then it became so big that maybe now we're like, especially on YouTube, we're seeing all these like people who are just they just openly admit they were intelligence before, and now they're doing this and that, and it's interesting to me. I don't have the answer. I'm not going to sit there and accuse anyone until but we 100%, and we'll get into the CIA right now, but like their fingerprints and the FBI are all over the 60s and 70s. They are inserting the children of these military like leaders into these cultural movements to send them certain ways. And and I'll end with this part and then we'll get into it. But even if you study the founding of America, there's a real argument that they were Freemasons that were attempting to basically break the control of the royal family over the new territories so the Bank of England could come in and take it over. So when people are like, oh, we revolted against only 4% tax against the royals. Why aren't we going that? Because it's a totally different group that are taxing us, which is the Bank of England right now, which are the Rothschilds. So it's like, they do that all the time. They sent in people as like, hey, we're one of you. Let's, and that's what we see in the 60s and the 70s, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened with feminism. So a lot of people do know that Gloria Steinem was part of the CIA in the 60s and 70s. But what they might not know is like they recruited her right away out of Smith College, and her grandmother, Pauline Perlmutter Steinem, that's a mouthful. She was actually a theosophist. So take that for what.
Hold on,
for what it's
real
worth.
quick. Theosophist, would you say that is like Satanism and stuff like that?
I think it is an intelligence created occult practice. So it's a part of the occult, but I think it was created by and for intelligence assets.
Okay.
Because Blavatsky was an intelligence asset herself, and it was a good way to get agents in and out of Kashmir and places in India they wanted to go. So like
Gotcha.
it was and Crowley was an intelligence agent as well. So it's like these people are often connected with espionage and or intelligence, but I think that Steinem's grandmother being into theosophy, whether she was part of intelligence or not, isn't really relevant. But I think that those beliefs trickle down, right? So the goddess worship element of theosophy probably trickled down to Steinem from her grandmother. And she went to Smith College, which was one of the first like women's colleges, and all the big feminists of the 50s and 60s came out of Smith, and a couple other colleges, but Smith was the main one. So the CIA went to Smith to recruit people to push feminism through the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And if you guys know anything about the Congress for Cultural Freedom, it was this widespread CIA program in the 60s and 70s. They had dozens of publications in like 40 countries around the world. And it was to push this Western liberal order stuff and draw the distinction between it and the communist like Soviet ethos, right? To kind of pit the two sides against each other. So they recruited Steinem to push feminism specifically, and they created a phony baloney, something called the Chester Bulls Fellowship. It's a fellowship program that was never given to anyone but her. So they made it just for her as a guise to send her to India right after college. So we have this tie of theosophy, which has its roots in India because Bailey, Annie Besant, Helena Blavatsky, all the theosophists were like centered in India. And again, I do think these people believed it, but I think it was also a front for intelligence. So they sent her under the guise of having this Chester Bulls Fellowship, which was created out of thin air, to send her to India for 2 years, where she worked with Jean Joyce from the Ford Foundation. Now, the Ford Foundation becomes important in the late 60s because they are the primary funders of the women's studies departments. The Rockefellers helped somewhat too, but the Ford Foundation was really instrumental in creating this as an academic discipline for the purpose of spreading Marxist feminist propaganda through the university system, recruiting all the women into universities. This is where this whole you have to go to college to be a good, successful girl thing comes from, because they wanted to put them all in women's studies, disseminate the feminist propaganda as a tool of social engineering, right? So we want free love. This whole 60s counterculture was extremely engineered. I know you guys have had Jay Dyer on to talk about this before and other people. Yeah, so this was part of it, that you can't push the free love and the like tear it all down, stick it to the man without feminism. And they wanted feminism again because it's a way to get women convinced that birth control is good, abortion is good, careerism is good, that you should be dedicating your efforts to the state and or corporations and not to your husband and your family. And to basically get us to replace fathers and husbands with the state.
Yes.
And I'll prove that that's exactly what they did in just a minute. But they send Steinem to India for 2 years, where she gets trained under the Ford Foundation's Jean Joyce. She attends a bunch of, we don't even know a lot about her time in India, and she doesn't talk about it a whole lot, but that's basically where they trained her. And after she was done with her time in India, they sent her to Europe to youth festivals, which Sam just told you, this is what they do. They send her to youth festivals to promote feminism, to give these fiery speeches, to, promote these ideas to young people in Europe, because we're talking about the Cold War era here. So she'd go to Germany and push feminism there. And then when she came back to the States, she got together with one of the CIA's top guys, Clay Felker, who gave her the money to start Ms. Magazine in 1972, which is where you get that Goddess Kali cover. So it was all CIA money that pushed that. Yeah. And the Congress for Cultural Freedom was like this huge propaganda arm. Operation Mockingbird was part of that, where you have all these media outlets pushing the same narrative, telling the same story. Because how do you think this happened in such a short period of time? Like, if you take a look at the statistics, if you look at, let's just take out of wedlock births, just one metric. In 1960, only 5% of children in the United States were born out of wedlock. By 2010, just 50 years later, that number jumps to 41%.
Damn.
That is a social revolution, the likes of which this world has never seen. Never have you gone in 50 years from having 5% of kids being born to unmarried parents to 41%.
Oh.
We're getting too close.
Of kids being born to unmarried parents, not engineered for that kind of change. We are not made to have that much change happen to us that quickly. And I think it just like mind fucked the last 3 generations of people.
I do 100%. And again, like we just talked on the last episode, like a lot of this is engineered to make people so dumb that they can't participate in government. And they can't understand like how their government is working against them, and how like this Federal Reserve is the center of all the problems in the world. Like so much is funding. Like you get into like, the CIA, this project, that it's all funded by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what happened? So we have this major revolution happen like in 1970s. You have women's studies departments being created and funded and put in every major university in the country. You have this massive recruitment propaganda telling all the high school girls that they need to go to universities, they need to go to college. And once they're on a college campus, do you guys remember Kent State? Do you remember all of the Roe versus Wade propaganda?
Yeah.
Right? So it's not by accident. This stuff didn't all happen at the same time by accident. It was on purpose because they wanted to make abortion legal, because they had already done that in Russia with devastating results on the birth rate there. So they knew that worked. The birth control pill was legalized in 1965. And they couldn't get women to vote. So this is another thing people don't know. Women have had the vote since 1920 in the United States. Almost no women voted for like the first 30 years.
Women don't vote now. They really don't vote.
Now they are the biggest voting bloc.
Yeah. Oh, snap.
This just changed. Well, it just changed. So this is new. Women weren't voting until they created women's studies departments in 1970 and pushed all the women into the workforce and the universities. We had the largest change, I think, was when during the decade of the 1970s, we went from having only, I'm looking at my notes here. Only 6% of children under the age of 6 had full-time working moms in 1940. By 2013, that number became 58%.
Wow.
And in the 70s, women just entered the workforce in huge numbers, and there was a lot of TV sitcoms. What was that big sitcom? Mary
Tyler Moore Show?
Mary Tyler Moore Show, right? Pushing this like career woman thing, Dolly Parton in 9 to 5. There's all this propaganda that came out in the 70s, the Stepford Wives movie. There was tons of cultural propaganda pushing women into the workforce, convincing them that being a suburban housewife was hell on earth. It was you're killing your soul. You have to be free. You have to go find yourself. Right?
Go work is freedom, dude. Think about that. Think about that.
My oldest daughter is 23, and when she was 21, I distinctly remember her calling me one day and going, "Mom," she's like, "I get it now. Working sucks. Why did they tell us this was awesome? What were we thinking?"
It
she was
sucks.
Just like, this sucks. Yeah. So we had this huge shift in the 70s, and it was because of women's studies programs. It was because of Roe v. Wade. It was because of this massive propaganda campaign in music, in movies, in TV shows, in magazines, telling women, and this is what we have right now. You cannot name a single female pop star who doesn't promote women's sexual liberation and strong independent women stuff. You got Taylor Swift, you got Beyonce, all these female, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion. It's like, I'm a dude. I can rack up bodies like a dude. I can go through 34 boyfriends and I can be sexually liberated. I can be a boss bitch and I've got all this money and I can pay my own bills and I don't need a man. This stuff got pushed, all through my childhood in the 80s and 90s. I grew up with She-Ra and, all of the strong independent woman stuff too. And being told that this is what I had to do. But this was Steinem's job. This is what her job through the CIA was, to do that. And it was not unrelated to their MK Ultra program. So I'm sure you guys probably know about MK Ultra. I've done tons of study. Other than feminism, MK Ultra I've probably done the most research on. And part of MK Ultra, it was basically a research program to figure out how do we brainwash people, how do we sway public opinion, by what means can we do mind control on a mass scale. And so part of MK Ultra was actually, the government is the one that kind of pushed LSD and disseminated it through the Grateful Dead, and Timothy Leary, and also through Terence McKenna. And he was important to this because he was pushing psychedelics, DMT, LSD, mushrooms, and goddess worship. So he would say, he would go around to universities giving speeches, and he's another guy that the CIA got him because he got himself in trouble. He got caught with drugs trying to cross a border. He got arrested, and they said, look, you can either spend a whole bunch of time in prison or you can come work for the CIA and push psychedelics on the culture and this sort of thing.
Damn!
Straightforward, too.
Yeah. So Terence McKenna spends the 80s and, most of the 70s and 80s pushing DMT, talking about the DMT elves and how we need to worship the goddess and return to the goddess. And this was a big influence, especially in those kind of cultures, this goddess worship stuff. And we've seen now in the United States, the last I checked when I wrote the book, Wicca and various forms of witchcraft are the fastest growing religion in the United States, because they've been pushing this Mother Earth worship, veganism, psychedelics. Now, I'm not saying that there might not be applications for psychedelics. I know there's people who are big fans of it. I'm not saying that there might not be some applications for that. But what I am saying is, if the CIA is pushing it and telling you need to go talk to the DMT elves, which are going to tell you to worship the goddess, you might just have a problem and you might just want to think about that. That's all I'm trying to say. Because they're not pushing this stuff because they love you and care about you. They want to know, how do we brainwash you, control you, and manipulate you so that we can, do whatever nefarious stuff we have going on. Yeah. So, the CIA was a big part of making this stuff mainstream through Ms. Magazine, through all of these. The CIA has its own budget for film and TV to disseminate propaganda and things of that nature, too. And just feminism was a huge part of it. You couldn't have the transgender phenomenon you have right now if you didn't push feminism first. Couldn't have it. Because you have Margaret Fuller was writing about gender as a spectrum and gender abolition in the 1840s. This is not a new idea. It actually goes back to ancient times. And then in the 1840s in America, we had Margaret Fuller and the Transcendental Club talking about gender as a spectrum and how if we want to get back to the one source of things and we want to be this human blob, this transhumanist blob, we have to abolish gender. And the first step to that is convincing women that they can be men and that men have to be feminine, and we have to have this gender equality and we're all just interchangeable widgets. So it's hard for people sometimes when they hear me just do a podcast like this and just lay all this stuff out. They get very overwhelmed and they're like, what? I don't get it. What are they trying to do? And it's mainly just, so the goals are depopulation, because the smaller the population is, the easier it is to control and the more resources there are for the elites. A lot of these people have very ancient ideas going back to Pythagoras and the Sumerians and all this sort of thing about goddess worship, about gender abolition, monism, all these kind of ancient concepts that elites adopt and then use because they want to engineer and control society and control population.
They weaponize them.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I would like to I'd like to end on this. Do you believe that all of the little g gods are and I don't know if you believe, I'm just asking, are like fallen angels?
I do. I actually just wrote an academic paper, my first academic paper that I presented at a conference, talking about paganism and feminism and how the Bible says that the gods of the nations, gods little g, are demons. And in the book here, I just highlighted this part because I wanted to see what you thought of it specifically, Sam. In 1 Timothy 4, it says, "Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their conscience seared with hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from meats, which God hath created to be received in thanksgiving of them which believe and know the truth." So just in those two verses, you have abolition of marriage, free love, veganism, speaking lies and hypocrisy, and departing from the faith and giving heed to seducing spirits, which that's why you always see sexuality bound up with feminism. It always has to be sexual liberation. There are some feminists who think that's bad. You have the Andrea Dworkins who think that all sex is slavery and that crazy nonsense. But is always, because that's what women's power is, right? If we're going to use our power in a subversive, inverted kind of way, we're going to use our sexuality to seduce and control men, to manipulate, to get our way. And that's typically what you see, like goddess worship temples had temple prostitutes. I think
and they were
this is
trans.
why,
Some of them were trans.
oh yeah, big time. They had eunuchs. They had little boys that were castrated. They had all this kind of deeply disturbing, inverted stuff. I don't think it's a coincidence that you now have OnlyFans, and like my two older daughters who are in their early 20s, they've had to talk multiple friends out of starting an OnlyFans. These girls turn 18 and it's the first thing they do is like, I got to start an OnlyFans. You never had that. Like, never before in history did you have this tool where almost every 18-year-old girl can now become a temple prostitute through the Black Mirror that she
you are
holds in her
so
hand.
right on that.
Whoa.
And if you kind of take a look at what is happening here, let's be honest, these girls are gorgeous with phenomenal bodies, right? Which is like in normal history is a high level woman, right? That is a coveted woman by super alphas, built like Viking chicks, right? But now they're getting into something that's super low vibrational, right? So then the super high alphas don't want anything to do with them. So these Viking women who are built like goddesses are now starting to mate with low vibrational men. And it starts to destroy the population. Like you're pushing away. Yeah, okay. Listen, oh man, look, I bought 1,000 houses off my OnlyFans money. That's great. Who's in your life? Who is hanging out with you? Who are you dating? Rappers? And we find they're all homo thugs, right? Again, I don't care what your sexuality. I like, dude, I'm not going to judge. You do you. As long as you don't hurt kids, I don't care. You can do whatever you want. What is high vibrational? What is low vibrational to me? Because you're bringing it, you're not, once you start doing the OnlyFans, you have cut off a large segment of the mating population. They do not want to be with you. So now you're picking scraps and you're probably fighting with all the other OnlyFans for the same amount of guys that will put up that bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm not judging, dude. Are you moving closer to God? Or are you getting farther from God? I struggle with that all the time. I make no illusions. I can't walk on water. I'll drown. I fight all the time to be a better person. I struggle constantly. You know, don't hurt children. You're on your path. But I'm just telling you, man, you know, when you look at porn stars, the average age of a porn star is the average life expectancy is like 35 years old.
Right.
You'll see.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about, we've had 100 years of feminism being by the way, this is the default setting now. So we're like fish that swim in feminist water. We don't even realize that we're operating off of like a feminist programming. So I talk to women all the time about deprogramming this, because I wasn't immune to it either. When I was young, I was just a normal girl operating off this feminist programming myself. And it's in all the Disney movies and it's in all the TV shows and all that stuff. But we've had 100 years of this now. And maybe there's women out there listening to this going, yeah, but think of all the ways that we might be better off with feminism now. And it's like, okay, well, let's look at all the metrics. Let's look at some statistics. So in 1960, 72% of all American adults were married. By 2016, that number dropped to 50%. And now I think it's even a little lower. Like the divorce rate is going down only because nobody's bothering to even get married anymore.
Right.
So that's one metric. We already talked about out of wedlock births going up by like a factor of 12 in just 50 years. In 2012, there was a really interesting study done on children who were admitted to psych wards in mental hospitals. And of all the children that they looked at, 89% of the kids who were admitted on a psych ward came from a disrupted family background, meaning they were not living with mom and dad married. It was some other situation. 89%. Then we look at 1/3 of all children now live in a home without their biological dad. And if you look at the statistics for kids who live without their father in their home, it's like 90% of homeless kids come from a fatherless home. 75% of kids who don't graduate high school. The vast majority, like 80-something% of kids who are in a substance abuse treatment center or like the mental health facility are going to have no dad at home. Every metric you look at for children, kids who are in juvie, same thing. Every time a kid ends up in a bad place as a child, the vast majority of the time, they do not have their dad at home living with them. And that wasn't normal until the last 40, 50 years. If you look at, this is another big one that I think you guys will like. So welfare spending. If you plot welfare spending on a graph along with those out of wedlock births we talked about, they go up like this, just in perfect lockstep together, which is how I said I'm going to prove to you we've replaced fathers with the state. So in 1950, when the out of wedlock birth rate was 5%, we had $50 billion a year in welfare spending. Not good, but this is adjusted for inflation, okay? So $50 billion in welfare spending isn't good, but by 2010, only 50 years later, when the out of wedlock births jumped to 41%, we now have $700 billion a year in welfare spending. So it's a 14 times increase in both out of wedlock births and welfare spending. I know it's just a correlation, but it's a hell of a correlation if you ask me. So this was by design. And part of the reason for this, like why do these people, these elites who do this social engineering, why do they want to get rid of dads? Why do they want dads out of the picture? Multiple reasons. One is the Marxist feminists wrote at length about how private property is passed through the father. Men with no legacy, men with no kids aren't going to have a legacy. Their property is going to end up in the hands of the state. Their wealth is going to end up in the hands of the bankers.
Unbelievable, dude.
Yeah. And another big reason is if you're a predator, the best way to get to kids is through a mom who has no dad in the home, right? So if you want to get to kids as a predator, you look for single moms. You look for moms where the dad is out of the picture. He's been kicked out. She divorced him or something, or the dad was never in the home. So there's a lot of reasons, but it's all bad stuff. And dads and husbands are the primary protectors. I have a piece on my Substack I would love for everybody to go check out. It examines 45 years of data of what happens when we remove dads from the home. Because in the 70s, a big point of the feminist propaganda was to say that the primary danger to women and children is the dad, the husband, right? Your husband is a drunk and he's going to beat you. He's going to be controlling. He's going to abuse you. If you don't have your own money, if you don't have your own education, your husband's going to end up being an abusive drunk who hurts you and your children. And women really bought this. They really bought into this. That propaganda started with the Women's Temperance Union, which is a whole other story. But it really got pushed in the 70s. And what actually happens when you remove fathers from the picture is that every metric of abuse for women and children goes up. You are not safer living with your boyfriend. You are not safer living as a single mom. You are not safer getting rid of your husband because he's the person who has the most vested interest in protecting you and his biological offspring. And we have 45 years of data from all reporting agencies that report to the government on any type of abuse of women and children. And it's overwhelming. Like, I feel like if people knew this information, it would change the world. But it's just not out there because the feminist, propaganda machine is so incredible. It's just so strong.
And I just honestly do believe that women are almost trained to accept that they're going to be divorced. And this is for men too, ladies. So don't think I'm just teeing off on you.
Right.
That we're going to end up divorced. We're going to be alone on fucking psych meds. That's what they're basically like. I get divorced. And it's almost like get divorced. Society tells you get divorced so you can get half his shit and then you can be free and find a guy you're more happy with. And then it's almost like, does it ever happen? And
very rarely. The statistics for second and subsequent marriages, the divorce rate gets higher and higher the more times you've been married. So no, and 26% of all adult American women are on at least one prescription psychiatric drug. And in my book, I also cite two major studies. This is in that Substack article too. They did a study in 2009 called The Paradox of Female Happiness, where they did like a massive survey of women in the West and found that to the extent that they were more liberated, the more miserable they were, which made me think to myself, liberated from what? We keep talking about women's liberation. Liberation from what? From motherhood, from your father who wants to love and protect you. Are there bad fathers? Yes. Are there bad husbands? Yes. But that is not the overall experience. That is not the general experience. In general, fathers want to protect their offspring. Husbands want to protect their wives. And by convincing women that husbands and fathers are the primary threat, it actually makes women more vulnerable to men who are predatory, who don't want to protect them. So, and then convincing them of this goddess worship stuff where you find your empowerment through sexuality. Girls, ladies out there, your sexual year, the years where you have this tremendous sexual power from maybe age 16 until 25, 30 years old. It's a temporary little period of your life where you're sitting on this magic thing that gets you pretty much whatever you want, especially if you're attractive, right? But it doesn't last. You have to think about that second half of your life. I'm 43 now, okay? It's like we see Hollywood women trying to be sexy at 70 and all this nonsense, and it's laughable. And it doesn't matter how much aborted fetus serum they rub on their face or, how much plastic surgery they get. They start to look, number one, transgender. These women that get tons and tons of plastic surgery start to actually look trans or start to look like aliens or like you get that uncanny valley thing going. So no, you're not going to be sexy at 70 and you shouldn't be shooting for that. You should be using those years to get the best man you can and build and create a family. And then once you do that, if you want to do what I did and like write a book, be on a podcast and talk to some great people like Sam and his guys here, you can do that. There's a lot of life to live in the second half of your life, but you don't want to be Chelsea Handler and be eating edibles and sleeping in until 2 p.m. and trying to make funny videos
and
that nobody
convince everybody
thinks is funny.
you're happy when it's so obvious that you're not.
Advice.
You're so obviously not happy. When you're constantly doing a video like, I'm so happy. It's like, who are you trying to convince? You or yourself?
It's like those perfect couples.
And it's so crazy because so many of my female friends that are doing comedy who I love, they like forever, they're like, yeah, I don't need kids. And then at the last second, they pulled the cord. And it's just like, how many people did you convince they didn't have to have children? Now they're running around trying to get pregnant. And we lost her.
That just closed, too.
Yeah. Oh, no, she's connecting back.
Are you back?
No, she's not yet. There it is.
It's coming.
Let us dance.
Come on.
Let us dance, Zoom.
It's just connecting right
Oh, my God. Anyways. So, I mean, let's see if she comes back.
We got, if she doesn't,
So nuts. So nuts. Donuts.
There she
Okay,
is.
you guys are
All
back.
right.
Yeah.
Let's not tempt it. This was a great
Cute.
show. Great show, Rachel. I mean, the Zoom people, apparently the Chinese are after us too. So not only is the U.S. government, but the Chinese government's onto us. Rachel, this is one of the best episodes we've ever done. You came here with the
Aw.
receipts. It was pure
shucks.
fire. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks.
One more time, can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Sure. My name's Rachel Wilson. You can find my book, Occult Feminism, The Secret History of Women's Liberation, right there on Amazon. It's currently #1 in its categories. You can also find me on rwilson.substack.com. And I also have a YouTube channel. Just search Rachel Wilson and I will come up.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, all the links below. Thank you so much. And yeah, dude, let's break down this episode. Crazy episode. Crazy episode.
Yep.
Right? I mean, what'd you think?
These are those ones where, like, usually I tell people we always have great episodes, but these are the ones where I'm gonna send it to my sister,
Yeah.
to my girl. Be like, just listen to this. Just listen. Please, just give it a listen and just let me know what you think. It's coming from a female that did some research. That's it.
I just like, of course, there's anomalies. The notion of having kids is somehow hurting your career is unbelievable. And the biggest thing is to watch the people who didn't have kids, see how upset they are, or see how they scramble to have kids eventually. So for me, it was a great episode. And again, it just gets into this thing where it's like everything is just an intelligence agent's trick. It just seems like they're at the forefront of all these fucking movements because they control the media and they control the money. They can just astroturf everything to, like, it doesn't work out. Like I said before, there's a good chance that Pornhub is CIA, and guess what else is CIA? OnlyFans.
The more you say that, the more I'm like 100%. Pornhub is for sure ran through. I say, why is it everybody's stepsister? There's something has to be connected to that.
Well, it's the fastest website to 50 million users ever.
Yeah. I mean, porn's it's a recession-proof business. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
But the
I
notion
think they probably backed a few horses, and that was the one that kicked it off.
Well,
but,
I mean, but if you study, like, Pornhub becomes the big free porn place.
I think they have their hands in everything, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Like, and
What?
The
Who?
CIA does.
Yeah, of course, but that's a big part of it. And then that leads. Now you got like the outlaws doing porn. All of a sudden, OnlyFans. Now every woman you know wants to be a porn star because they think it's like glamorous. I don't know why. You know, it's like, yeah,
It's been normalized, is what's happened.
It has been normalized, dude.
You know what else was normalized that I didn't tell her? Divorce. How people celebrate divorce. Back then, it used to be like kind of shameful. You know, you didn't talk about it. And now it's like all over Instagram. Like, I know people are getting divorced and they have like divorce parties. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's not, you failed. Why are you celebrating that you failed something? It's not
Well,
good.
it's also that, like, the notion that there's something on the other side, like a happier on the other side type thing. And it's like social media hasn't helped either. Because let's say you marry a beautiful woman, she takes pictures of herself on the internet. She's just getting hit up in her DMs all the time. Oh, girl, you fine.
It works the other way too. You say you have a beautiful woman, and all you see, because eventually, you're gonna get a little bored. And when you're tempted in that way, by social media, that
I guess
it leads men astray,
I'm
too.
not against that.
Double-edged
I'm not
sword.
against it.
I'm against it. It's terrible.
They say if you have too many options, you're not a happy person. People with less options tend to be more happier.
It's the reason the Chinese are cracking down. We talked about this on Broken Sim on wealth flaunting on social media. They just killed a bunch of accounts of people who were bragging about their wealth, and showing designer handbags and shit because they don't want people to see what the others have,
Yeah.
And in this country, it's run amok. I mean, I'm not saying that's a good thing that their government can do that, but
I mean,
dude, that's a great point, Johnny. Going viral has destroyed social contracts. People are doing
that's the way to
shit
put it. Yeah, for
that
sure.
they would never do before social media. Now to go viral, do you see the guy giving people like DDTs in the subway? And you're like, how are you doing that to regular people? And then you post it on Instagram or TikTok because the whole point is to go viral?
You get strung up for doing something like that 50 years ago, and now you're a fucking viral superstar.
Yeah, I know, dude. I know. It's just crazy.
Well, I think it also has, because those are people who would be doing wrong no matter what, but it's kind of emboldened the worst people in society. You know what I mean? It's magnified their traits and
Well, it's made people that don't have a lot of options go for it really hard, right? And then you're like, what are we doing here?
You know how they say that it always swings? You think it'll swing back though?
mine always swings for sure.
Does it?
Just like what you did, actually. Do that again.
Like that? That's what it does. Anyways,
Yeah, I mean,
but
like,
you think
yeah.
it'll push back? We're
You
like
see
some people
women
are like,
now
hey,
talking about like, dude, I don't want to be a feminist anymore. Fuck you. You know, that's it. So I thought it was one of the best episodes we've done. I mean, that's crazy seeing that we're almost up to 800 episodes, and I'm like,
Are
dude,
we? Wow.
yeah. I mean, we're very close, Johnny, to 800.
And we were just, it feels like 500 was just a blink away. I mean, that's.
Yeah, yeah. It's just crazy to me. All right, guys, go to SamTripoli.com. All my videos are there, dude. You don't have to. I'm trying to get us back. Bang, bang, pow.
What's that reaction face on the homepage there with you? What are you thinking there? What's your motivation?
I don't know. It's like usually what I'm doing is like, I don't know. Johnny hates my thumbnail face. He's always complaining about. Guys, this weekend,
Fit your whole fist in your mouth.
John, we are going to be live at the Dojo of Comedy in Morris Plains. We got first Thursday night is just a stand-up comedy night, and then Friday night is 2 shows. We got Tinfoil Hat Comedy, and then we have Swarm Take where you can ask us anything. And then the next night we have a double bangers. I got to put out an ad for this one for Brook. Go grab your tickets now. Then Kansas City, Missouri. I need to get some more dates going. Anyways, this is how I feel. Go to SamTripoli.com. All of our affiliate programs there. My guys, I'm putting out 5 free episodes a week of an hour and something. Support all of us by checking out our premium content. Okay, just check out our premium content. It really helps us, helps everything we're doing. $8, you get all the multiple episodes I'm doing a week. It's a great way to just say thank you. Thank you for your service. Okay, then if you don't want to pay $8, you want to pay $15 for all of Rockfin, you can go to Rockfin. Bang, bang, pow. There we go. Tinfoil Hat, Zero, and Conspiracy Social Club. Bang, bang, pow. Chaos Twins are coming back. I'll let you know as soon as that's go down. Cash Eddies is on fire. Look at all. We got 700 subscribers. Bang, bang, pow. Everybody making money. Cha, cha, cha. Okay? And then all of our associates, all of our affiliate programs. We got Buy Gold and Silver. We have Rife Technologies. We have AquaCure Hydrogen Brown Gas. Again, Gold and Silver. Get in there. Now, dude. The Saudis just got off the petrodollar. Gold and silver, buy it now. Put it in your safe. Don't put it in the banks like they did before, and they fucking locked it up. Put it in your own safe. Buy gold and silver. Go there. Promo code Tinfoil, right? And then we got AquaCure Hydrogen Brown Gas. We got Harley Ray. We love them. Candles. We got our good friend, Chemical Free Body. I do it every day. I just took it during the show. I love it. And then we got my boy, Joel Staley, getting in shape. Help me with those titties, guys. My autistic daughter hates my titties. Okay, so I'm working out.
Does she?
Yeah, she hates my titties, dude. Dana can't stop laughing. As soon as I take my shirt off,
What does she
goes
do?
in my room, grabs a shirt, and walks up and hands it to me.
That's great. Wow. I love that.
And then my good friends at EMF Rocks, we got to get them on here. I'm telling you guys, dude, all this electricity around us, not good, okay? Get into the Telegram groups, talk to other swarms, join Zero Telegram group. I got to start getting back on Zero. Go up! Okay, there we go. All 7 podcasts. And by the way, Broken Sim has been fire. We're in the top 160 of comedy podcasts on all the comedy on Apple.
Crazy.
1 episode. That's insane to me. Go back down. My radio, and then finally all the videos, all my specials, all my stuff. Anything else, guys?
hit that like button, subscribe, and Eddie Bravo just came on We Don't Smoke the Same, and he turned occult people into flat earthers. So go check that out.
Let's
That's
go.
cool. Johnny Woodard on Twitter. Come hang out.
Okay, enjoy these highlights.
Here's a clip from the latest Broken Sim. In Ukraine, when you remember before the war, Russia had occupied Crimea, of course, and Ukraine apparently just dammed up the river so that Crimea then had this catastrophe. You know, they had no water. So the people there couldn't survive. The Russians there couldn't survive. And that was the idea. That's what Ukraine. So really, that was secretly one of the big drivers behind the whole war, was the Ukrainians turning off the water to this whole region. That was like the first thing the Russians did. As soon as the Russians came in, they blew up this dam. There's a video of it, and the water like flowing finally to that part of Crimea. You know, so that was just fascinating. But I wanted to say that to bring up kind of Lindsey Graham spilling the beans on it related to that this week. He spilled the beans on the whole thing unwittingly. Why we're in Ukraine right now?
Like, do you really believe anybody votes for that guy?
He's the devil, dude. I do. I worked in. I mean, where he's from. You know, I worked at a newspaper down there. Web editor, and people vote for this.
So that area, would you say it's conservative?
Oh yeah, big time. It's
so
retirees.
Conservatives love a Queenie guy representing them.
They view him as like
the greatest
a reliable,
gay ever.
no, like a reliable kind of like a old grumpy kind of reliable. You know, like Lindsey gets us. You know,
Lindsey. They say like that too. Yeah. Lindsey gets us.
Yeah, Lindsey's fighting for us.
Yeah,
that's what. It's mostly ladies, you know, and they're not thinking too much about it.
All right.
But I'm surprised every time he is reelected. Anyway, this is just him unwittingly giving up the whole game on Ukraine and Russia.
What did Trump do to get the weapons flowing? He created a loan system. They're sitting on $10 to $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends.
Here's why nobody's buying that. This is like what they were like kind of like under their breath telling us about if we invade Iraq.
Yeah,
oil's going to be cheap, right? Oh, dude, all that oil's going to be so cheap now. It wasn't.
It's about control.
This helps no one. It's the same thing when that dumbass governor of ours is like, you know, we got more Fortune 500 companies than any other state. You're like, that doesn't do anything for the common man, the guy who's struggling day to day to pay his things. Those Fortune 500 companies are probably tech companies at this point who have an office with 10 people in it, and
they don't hire people.
Yeah, they don't hire people.
Yeah.
So this guy's like, they got these. Every time he opens his mouth, a purse falls out, right? And he's just like,
he's right though. This is about them making money. It's just not everybody. It's not helping any of the rest of us.
But this is almost them going, hey, we can take those resources too, and it will help you. And we know it's not going to help us.
No, he shouldn't have said this. Is the thing, and this is him spilling a little bit too much. I just want. It's got like 10
Let's
seconds.
help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China.
It's more China scaremonger, which China, there's plenty to scaremonger about.
But so why is this guy kick out China taking our water?
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't you kick him out from buying land, you piece of shit? Because you don't care. You really don't care.
No.
Dude, these people will go down as what you're going to see people like Lindsey Graham, Schumer, all these fucking scumbags. They're all going to go down as Bolsheviks. They're all going to go down as these are the people that sold us right out. It's happening.
Do you really think that happens?
Yeah. I
hope so.
What? That they're going to be...
So.
Johnny, do you understand to get to that, though? It's going to get really bad.
It's got to get bad, yeah.
It's got like
food scarcity will be a big part of that, by the way. On land. Water and food scarcity will be a big driver of that. Another thing in this doc I was looking at is if you go back and look at the revolutions in the Middle East and all that unrest, most of that, even like Boko Haram, if you look at that, and ISIS, it was all people involved in that who were food insecure. Like, if you look at even the Somali pirates, dude, the reason a lot of those guys became pirates is because they were fishermen. Industrial fishing came out and just stripped all the fish out of their land, and they had no way to make a living. So they were like, well, we know how to drive a boat, you know? So they started stealing from the same kinds of boats that destroy the fishing land, or the fishing ground.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, like, I'm really trying to find land right now.
We go deep, homeboy. Aaron, open your mind. Drink from the fountain of knowledge. There's lizard people everywhere. That's some interdimensional shit. Wake up, Aaron.
This is only the beginning.
Dude, you just blew my mind.
Tinfoil hat.